This is Space Ants, Part 9, Catch a Star, an original composition by Eric K., copyright 2024. An ant from geyser control went to Thoxel, the drone. Now! Knocks on the ice walls passed the same message down to other rooms. Thoxel woke. He and his command crew hyperventilated all the oxygen in his room. They took one large final breath into their bodies, then nibbled a small piece of medicine which helped them calm down and preserve oxygen. A door ant opened suddenly, and the remaining air hissed out. Hundreds of other ants poured out from dozens of other holes, and a mass wave of ants climbed into a scaffolding. The structure, made of thin spines, outlined a rather long cone structure. Ants assembled themselves by climbing over each other and on the thin ladders. Each took their exact appropriate place. Thoxel and his entire command crew scurried over and up to their positions at the front. His antenna tapped on his crew. Sighter 1, Sighter 2, signaler counter. He checked to make sure they were each in place. He and his command crew held on to each other and their precious payload, the holobiont egg. They sat perched on top of a long cone of ants, all positioned at a half slant up. His command signaler received information from another signaler down the chain of ants. On the sides of the tube, ants braced against the ice walls, and every ant settled into their position. Ahead, Thoxel saw the black expanse of space at the end of the dark tube. Good, his signaler counter said to him. Go, Thoxel confirmed. Go. His signaler counter replied to geyser control. Ahead at the exit, he saw a signaler pose holding the number 6. Thoxel signaled ahead. Good. He looked back and saw hundreds of black eyes look forward to him, the commander of his insane mass of ants. The tube's exit signaler contorted its body into a 5, then a 4, 3, 2, 1. Far below, dozens of big-headed ants moved their heads off the small holes where their bodies held back the pressure of the ice moon. Dozens of tubes all converged at the bottom of the ant structure. Large diameter pipes squeezed into smaller ones, and the large hydraulic forces pushed the ants up the slope. The zero pressure of vacuum boiled the water into gas, creating even more expansion, which further propelled the space ants up the slope. Thoxel and his command crew held on with all 6 legs. The entire ship of ants tensioned as they were slowly shoved out the tube. Rumbles and sounds were loud but brief, as the whole mass of ants went airborne and cleared the tunnel, their mass still driven by the geyser's push. Silence overtook them. The geyser's shove stopped, and drone Thoxel felt weightless, as many of his past forefather drones had been long ago, jumping from rock to rock. He felt something like elation when he experienced the joy of soaring weightless through the infinite. It was in his instincts. He was sublime. Doubtless it was part of the medicine, which kept him in a clear-headed but calm state to preserve oxygen. Thoxel physically felt only the tapping of the signalers and a squeeze as his sisters held tight. His command sighters fixed their gaze below and observed their location relative to the ground. The ants had worked with neighboring colonies to flash other geysers up whenever their colony saw the space ant spacecraft soar over their horizon. He looked back. Silver Star. It had come over the horizon and was far above and behind them. Ignite, he gave the command. His command signaler passed the order down to the stages. Most of the mass of this crazy contraption were the bullet ants. These were the latest adaptation of the heater ants. In their bulbous rears were 2 glands. One contained hydroquinone and the other hydrogen peroxide, ordinary precursors to other biological reactions. The 2 chemicals were hypergolic and ignited spontaneously on contact in a small chamber at their rears. Those reaction chambers were reinforced by thick exoskeletons. Originally used as transportation to slide through the long tunnels between colonies, bullet ants were repurposed for thrust. It had taken many generations, exposed to viruses, fungi, and increasingly adapted to traverse vertical tunnels, for space ants to be ready for launch. A chemical, which had once been a defensive irritant on their homeworld eons ago against predators and turned into a heat source on the moon, was now used as a propellant. The bottom layer of bullet ants began their reactions, and thrust pulsed out. It started rather slowly, but steadily built until the rocket clenched with every leg holding every ant. 2 bullet ants on the outside vectored their thrust clockwise to introduce a spin. This balanced out errors which occurred due to the natural variation of ants and the biological nature of their rocket. Thoxel looked behind him. There! Silver Star was still above and behind. He tapped on his command sighter. He could not get a fix on it, though his cast had once soared through the void. Their ant rocket ship rotated, and his sighters scurried around to maintain tracking on the Silver Star. They estimated the trajectory and tapped out commands to the signaler. One sighter brought out a tool of 3 spines. She placed them in a triangular formation. 2 ants from the final stage held the spikes in their mandibles. The craft's rotation complicated their measurements. Faster! A sighter commanded the signaler. The signaler relayed the order down the mass of ants. Then the first layer released their reactions at increased frequency. The expansion of the chemicals put pressures on their glands, which squeezed the glands shut for a moment. Then as the pressure subsided, the outgoing gas suctioned more chemicals into the reaction chamber, and the reaction pulsed stronger. Drone Thoxel felt more force. He stayed in serene stillness and preserved his oxygen. Beneath him, the royal egg laid inert, nested in the center of the holobiont egg, along with many spheres of insect jelly. This was their payload, and he was the final stage guidance mechanism. The first stage completely spent itself, and with one final exertion, those ants pushed themselves off. Thoxel felt the weightlessness return. He looked above. Silver Star was now much larger, and not a star, but a small sphere. Their air in his carapace grew stale, but he took no action. They zeroed out their rotation, and the command crew conferred with each other. The sighter, using the simple instrument of the spine tripod, observed the silver sphere. At regular intervals, she would command the second stage to change the direction of thrust. With another tool, which had a long curved edge, they measured the angle of approach. The command crew calculated. Faster! His sighter passed the command down. Thoxel again held firm as the ants of the second stage fired. Force propelled them forward. They were really moving fast now. He felt a strong, uneven rumble from below. A bright flash reflected off the watery mists which had followed them into orbit. The sky spun. Instabilities with their center of mass and the unexpected thrust from that misfired second stage ant had flipped their rocket over. His peace and passiveness evaporated like liquid in a vacuum. Stop, he commanded. He saw his signaler held on with 4 legs, while 2 others floated freely as they spun over 2 axes. Thoxel tapped the emergency stop signal. He felt the thrust cease. His back 4 legs held onto 4 points of contact, while his forelegs grasped for his crewmate. Zero out, he told his command crew. They all ran counterclockwise around the top of the structure. When the spin had been more or less eliminated, they were still tumbling end over end. Finally, the command crew took their bearings. Thoxel held firmly with his claws. Silver sphere? Location? A sighter asked. Their antennas were all cool and calculating. Bearing? The other signaler inquired, eager to restart the second stage. Zero out tumble, Thoxel said. The command signaler crawled back to the second stage. She instructed a single ant to fire and vector their thrust in the direction of their somersault. Their tumble slowed. Thoxel ran around the craft counter to the last fraction of the spin. All axes were zeroed out. He resumed his position near the egg, bearing, and the sighter pointed a specific direction. The signaler gave orders, and the living craft altered position. Faster, the sighter requested. Thoxel ran again to reintroduce a spin and held on. The rest of the second stage reignited. Again, Thoxel felt exhilaration from the increased thrust. He tried to track the silver sphere, which was streaking overhead. Then their thrust stopped. He saw the second stages drop and twist goodbye in the black sky. One ant had yet to expend all her chemicals. She spun until her abdomen exploded and bathed them all in brief light. Chunks of its abdomen became orbital debris. They were on their final stage now. 2 of their final 8 ants fired. Thoxel looked above and right. The silver star. It was even closer. Too low. His antenna tried to message his command crew signaler. Miss. He watched them cross above its trajectory and burst past underneath. Overshot. The entire structure rotated as if in one accord. With so much weight discarded, they could alter velocity easily, but still they were on the wrong trajectory. They were too high and too slow. Thoxel eased his anxiety, and the ship continued to rotate until he was on the underside, shielded from the sun. He saw the silver silhouette by the black side of their moon. He briefly wondered how they would track it during eclipse. but as their orbit was so high and so fast that any shadows would be brief. Those first 2 ants of the 3rd stage were expended, then pushed off. It was Thoxel, his command crew, and 6 final propellant ants. The craft rotated roughly parallel to the path, sideways and a bit down. 4 more ants fired off their reactions, and a stronger acceleration began, but quickly ceased. The whole stage started and stopped in a jerky manner. Full throttle, then stop. Accelerate, alter, then accelerate again to align their parabolic orbit with Silver Star's velocity and trajectory. Thoxel watched the sphere. It grew big and white as they approached. He saw no seam and briefly wondered if the hooked spines of the holobiont egg would catch anywhere. Silver Sphere was completely round, like ants have carved a perfect circle of pure ice. It looked like magic, but he saw it unfold or unroll or something. He did not have the words for it. Then the craft seemed to unpack itself. It enlarged its volume and expanded out like one large cavern. It stayed connected to itself, but appeared to be hollow inside. Good, he thought. It looked like a larger target, and therefore an easier jump. His command crew grew tired. They still had more breath, but they stopped the frantic calculations and sat still like him. Their craft was still above, but now their relative velocities diminished. Thoxel could not tell who was faster, but it had to be them, because the growing sphere was still a considerable distance ahead. With each adjustment, it seemed the Silver Sphere responded to their actions and caused the rendezvous to occur sooner than expected. The 4 propellant ants dropped away, leaving the final 2 of the original 8. Thoxel now roused himself. His muscles tensioned as he gauged whether the jump was possible. It looked doable for him alone, but not him and the egg. His command crew perked up too. They checked the orbits with long, curved tools. The signaller commanded the remaining 2 ants with thrust commands. They all held onto each other as the 2 gently released brief spurts of power for a few moments. Another position check, and then a quick burst of thrust. Thoxel stayed quiet and passive, conserving his air, but his eyes always watched, and mind always calculated how probable the jump was. Those final 2 propellant ants exhausted their energy. They fell away lifeless. There was no kick or twist, and they would suffocate long before their trajectory went suborbital and impacted them into the surface. Thoxel floated weightless. It was him, his command crew, and the payload. All they needed now was time for the 2 orbital arcs to overlap at the same time. This was the waiting game. His command signaller counter came to him. 23 longs, or how many more long moments they needed before the orbits were the closest. This stage of the rendezvous took the longest. He felt his air growing stale, but resisted all urges to react. The medicine had worn off, but he resisted panic and stayed motionless and calmed his body. Thoxel eyed the distance. Possible, though still improbable, especially since he needed to hold the egg and could only push off the 3 remaining ants. They were the same mass as him and the egg. He felt cold, even when the sun was on him. Their time was running out. 15 longs, the signaller sighter said. Thoxel clutched the holobiont egg. The new queen was inside, along with the various other creatures they cultivated, packed with royal jelly. The egg also contained numerous packages of silk, the sacred texts of knowledge, which could be read once weavers were hatched. 10 longs. He felt the command crew scurry over him and reset their tools on the front. Then they stopped. All was silent. They returned and got behind him, formed a tight ball for him, and held on to his back legs. Go. This was the penultimate moment of his fate. He was birthed, fed, trained, and instructed for this exact jump. Thoxel moved his head back and forth to gain a better perspective on the Silver Sphere. It seemed motionless. His hind legs tensed, his legs triggered. He jettisoned his command crew with all the strength they had and shot into the black. It was now him and the egg. Ahead and below, a faint mist of water ice could be seen. The Silver Sphere opened up a catchment. It flew through the ice mist, and a wake of black could be seen behind it like it had collected the mist. It suddenly rotated. It was not, in fact, featureless. Thoxel saw the lone green eye of the Silver Sphere. The piercing laser light hit him and the egg. It ran quickly over them both. He did not know what to do. He had only a bit of life in him, but felt he could do one final push to alter the direction of the egg, but strangely, it was not needed. The silver sphere approached with no effort of his own other than his mind's will. He clutched the egg. The silver sphere expanded and engulfed the green egg. Thoxel pushed off as if to give it one last kick for good measure, though it was firmly in the sphere. Thoxel spun slowly in the void. With each passing moment, he felt the mission and his life had been a resounding success. The colony's prized possession had been delivered. The strange silver sphere closed back up in a slow and soft way, which did not give him any fear. He had done it. He had done his best and given his all, for hill and hive, for future, queen and colony. But he could not follow. Thoxel floated peacefully in orbit. Right before passing out, he saw the stars roll away from the center of the sphere. The sky went a starless blank. Then the silver sphere blinked out of existence, and Thoxel passed out in that null space. The space probe had achieved all its programmed scientific goals. It had mapped, scanned, and sampled this strange biome, unique in the cosmos, and the amazing life it contained. The sphere unrolled itself from the wormhole and re-emerged in a different star system. Another burst of light from the causality spike, though it was far less. It was always the first linkage of different spacetimes resulted in the largest release of light. Though it did not go unnoticed, the device lit its beacon and waited for retrieval. The end. For now, at least. Space Ants will be taking a several-month hiatus as I focus on writing another novel. This has been Space Ants, Part 8, Sight of the Blind, an original composition by Eric K., copyright 2024. This audio has been artificially narrated by Revoicer. Subscribe to my channel for more Space Ants and hit that like button. It makes the ants happy and helps the colony get through one more orbit. You don't want Space Ants to die, do you?